turn to Professor Adamson and ask about mental health, but specifically mental health around election time. And to the extent that you can, share with us either what have you seen or what does research tell you or your read of the media for how the whole election cycle affected our mental health collectively and I guess as individuals as well.
Well, so I think that of the questions that I was sent in preparation for today, this was one of the most complicated, right? And part of that is because election seasons can create space for the gamut of emotional responses, both healthy and unhealthy, right? There's intrinsic responses and feelings towards casting votes and being a part of that process. We see a lot about empowerment and hopefulness in the research there. But then I also think that in some ways this election year is like one that we haven't experienced before in our lifetime. And that's probably because of the intersectionality of all the things going on right now in the world, right? We've got a global pandemic. The way that we voted was much different than maybe we've done in previous years. When you look at the weather, the natural disasters that we've experienced in the last few months, even the ice storm here in Oklahoma in October, all of these different things are impacting our mental health. Also the global protests and calls for action to end systemic racism. So a lot of reports are coming out that indicate that our society is experiencing greater amounts of stress and that we're more isolated with less support during this time. The CDC recently published results from a survey that was distributed in June of 2020. And compared to June of 2019, the prevalence of anxiety disorders had tripled, the prevalence of depressive disorders had quadrupled, and we've seen an increase in those who've seriously contemplated suicide in the past year. Now, for a jump from 2019 to 2020, what we saw in one calendar year, those are pretty sobering statistics for us right now in our general population.
Yeah, so can you just repeat the rate of depression and anxiety that was compared with, you say 1990 where it's tripled and quadrupled?
No, 2019. So in 1 year.
In 1 year?
In 1 year, the CDC surveys showed that there was the prevalence of depressive disorders had quadrupled and anxiety disorders had tripled in 1 year. And a lot of that, when we look at the populations that are most affected, it's our minority populations. It's adults who are caregiving for other adults. So non-paid essential workers are experiencing much more depression and anxiety. So I really think it's the intersectionality, and it speaks to that in the research of all of these things coming together in the same year, and also being an election year, a very important election year.
Wow, okay, well, thank you. I mean, that's pretty staggering. Dr. Lloyd-Jones, I would like to exercise my right to disengage in election-related conversations. So I'm turning to you to ask, what are some ways you can inform colleagues, peers, friends, family members of my choice not to discuss election results? What are some strategies to use?
Well, that's a great question. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yeah.
Great. Well, just to add to those statistics, according to a recent Pew Research Center survey, 2/3 of Americans are experiencing news fatigue and election burnout. And so I am not surprised that people are electing to take a hiatus from engaging in political related conversations, and they want a break. For instance, I recently joined a Skype call with several community members, and while we waited for others to join the call, we engaged in conversation about the election results. And shortly thereafter, one of the persons on the call unmuted himself and stated the following. He said, I have elected to disengage from talking about politics for my own reasons. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like for us to change the topic. And we paused, but nobody pushed back. We honored his request and we moved on. And so that is an example of someone taking ownership and saying, this is not something I would like to talk about. I later analyzed his request, and I concluded that the reason he did not suffer any pushback or that we complied was because his request was brief, polite, or respectful, and it was not harsh, and consequently we comply. So here's the heart of the matter. You can decide how you want to answer, or if you do not want to answer, make sure your response is respectful and brief. You should go a long way with that.
Okay. I mean, the direct approach, right? When in doubt. Thank you for that. This next question is for all of our panelists. And Professor Adamson, we can start with you. The election results do impact us all, including children and young people. So what are some ways to engage in healthy conversations with children and young people regarding election results?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I think it's really important to remember that kids pick up on our emotions, right? And so, especially those of their parents and their caregivers. I would say, you know, one of the most important things is just to be present and to have the conversations. I read a really great article in USA Today, and I'll actually put the link to it in the chat. But it was just exactly about this, about how to have these conversations. And really the number one kind of priority there in the article, and that I've used with my own children, is just to meet them where they're at, right? This isn't about me, it's about them and having these conversations. So to check in and see, you know, what are they hearing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And then responding to that in an age appropriate way, where you're both honest, but having a message there of hopefulness. Because I think that in a lot of ways, what kids are hearing away from, at least my children away from me, are some of those scary things, that if this happens, the world ends. And so just challenging that and making sure that honestly we're conveying what's going on, and also that message of hopefulness is really important.
Okay, thank you. I mean, and of course, using the example of, you know, how you relate to your own family and your own children is probably a good example. Dr. Lloyd-Jones, how about you? What do you suggest for young people or engaging about this?
Well, I have a wonderful opportunity in terms of personal experience to facilitate a conversation with parents and their college-age daughter, who the parents and the daughter had held different political political views. And what we learned by listening to the daughter, because the parents had been really trying to push their point of view, but we learned that the daughter had engaged in research and had written a couple of research papers on climate issues, and climate control or climate issues was her area of interest, and she felt strongly about it. Also participated in a student group that looked at these issues related to climate. And what we learned was that the parents had no idea that their daughter was so interested in this area, and they agreed to read her papers and also listen to her talk on a podcast. And I look forward to talking with them next at the end of the month to learn how they are growing and learning to understand one another. So listening again is so very important when we are talking to our children and our young people who we have raised to be critical thinkers in many instances and independent thinkers. And when they become independent thinkers, sometimes we push back. But I think they're going to end up on a very good note.
One thing to remember about with children, that they're new arrivals on the political scene. The rest of us have been around for a while. Children are new, which means that they're taking the information from this year's election, and that becomes huge in their understanding of what's going on. The rest of us grew up at a time when there was a good guy and a bad guy, but it was just a good guy and a bad guy. For children this year, because of the intensity of feeling that so many people have had, it can be a scary thing, because for children, stability, security are very important. And then we hear this year, the world's going to come to an end if this candidate wins or if the other candidate wins. So it's easy for children to see a level of danger in the elections on an emotional level beyond what the adults are seeing, even if the adults are using language that suggests the hugeness of the stakes. And so it's important for children to understand that, their security, their stability isn't going to be affected. We may all feel very strongly and feel that important things are at stake, but it may not really be as bad as it sounds to the children.
Okay. All right, I have a series of individual questions for each of you before another group question. So this one is to Dr. Lloyd-Jones. Whether the election results were in, say, your favor or not, this time of year it can be overwhelming. So what are some ways you recommend recharging after election season? You're on mute.
Thank you. I love the word recharge. It means to rejuvenate, renew, and refresh. And during our last discussion, panel discussion, I mentioned treating ourselves to a spa day and doing that at home. Again, that nice warm bath with scented candles and some nice relaxing music. I'd like to add to that, however, and talk about exercise and nutrition. And we all are aware of that. And for those of us who have substituted sitting for physical movement and fast food for healthy food choices, we may want to remind ourselves of the benefits of healthy eating and physical movement. I also would like to mention the notion of self-talk, positive self-talk. We all say things to ourselves. What did you say to yourself this morning in the mirror? Oh, you look great. You are wonderful. You will do a great job. So we want to make sure that we are speaking positively to ourselves, which will bring about, according to research, increased self-confidence, increased self-esteem. These are all ways to recharge ourselves. I don't want to leave out volunteering. Volunteering is a way to recharge yourself by thinking of others. And what we know is that you can volunteer virtually, or you can text, or you can phone. And nonprofits, local nonprofits like Life Senior Services, you can call and find out, what can we do for our older adults? Could they use someone to pick up a prescription and drop it off? Could they use someone to drop off toiletries? Could they use a weekly phone call, someone to check in on them? These are ways that we can recharge ourselves by reaching out. Volunteering has benefits, positive benefits. For example, it makes you happy, it increases self-confidence, it provides a sense of purpose. May I drop the mic now?
Professor Adamson, I have a question for you, which is finding a means of support, both within the institution or within the community. What are some support structures you might recommend for folks who might be having election-related dysphoria or election-related anxiety, ways to process that?
Yes, I think it's important to identify who your support system is and to identify where those healthy places are to have those conversations. I love Dr. Lloyd-Jones' example of volunteering, because I think a lot of us are still trying to find our supports, right? Maybe we have them built in with friends and family, or maybe we're trying to recreate those natural supports. And volunteering and making connections can be a nice place of starting to form some of those relationships. You know, within the university, I know lots of the colleges and departments have student groups. And I think those are another nice way. As I was thinking about this question, I kind of thought about how you all may be experts yourselves. I mean, you all made it here today to be a part of this panel and have conversations and ask questions here in this space. So continue doing that. Stay plugged in, look for those opportunities. I think as far as like mental health supports, it's also important to keep in mind that we've got a great resource here on campus for students in our student affairs office. So if you're looking for a place to process and to get some of those types of mental health supports, that's an office that students can go to. And then for staff and faculty, we also have the EAP through the HR website. We've got lots of different community groups that are meeting. Some of them are politically focused. Action Tulsa came to mind for me. I actually made a short list here of different resources. We've got the Equality Center, the Grief Center, Tulsa Cares, the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma that are involved in having some political discussions and advocacy there. We've got lots of different providers in our community. We're actually very rich in that way, where we have everything from small private practices to large community mental health centers to also find support and a place to process.
Thank you for the list and sharing the resources, because that, I think, is helpful. I really do. Professor Randle, I wanted to ask you, it's early yet, and in many ways, I would say even at the top level, I mentioned earlier that, like, for example, the House of Representatives is not, many of the elections are yet to be called, and we have I think a decisive presidential in the Electoral College, but President Trump, I guess, is at this point sort of famously refusing to concede or offer a concession speech. What do you think will be the lasting impact of this election?
Well, it's important to recognize we've just had an election of really extraordinarily historic dimensions because of the bitter emotional divisions among the people in the country. So this is going to continue on, and ways have to be found to bring us together. I don't think that the ways to do that have yet been identified, but it's going to be very, very dangerous for our national future if we're divided, one half thinking one way, the other half thinking another way, and neither side being able to understand what in the heck is wrong with the others. It is a dangerous division, and it contributes, of course, to the gridlock in Washington. We can't deal with national issues because of the bitter political nature of it all. So this really has been qualitatively a different kind of national election, and it presents severe challenges for us. The fact that the president is unwilling to accept an outcome and to participate in the American democratic traditions of welcoming the new occupant of the White House, even if that new occupant is one that just beat you in the election. Our traditions have made sacred a lot of things, including the peaceful handoff of power, the acceptance of the democratic will of the people. This year, that's challenged. And so the president's behavior, in my opinion, simply is giving justification to those divided halves of the country. The one half now thinks, well, we didn't lose the election, it was stolen from us. And the other half thinks, look at the way in which our problems are being made even worse than they already were. So it contributes to the intensity of the divisions within the country. Let me stop. I want to go back and add a compliment to Brenda Lloyd-Jones for recommending a positive approach to things. So before the election, the positive thing we could have all done was simply think, there are other great countries in the world where we could go live, where democracy would be safe, and where life could go on in ways that didn't require us to live with things in this country if they had gone badly. So, sometimes we get in a situation like actually we're still in today, where, gosh, it can be hard to find the positive. It can be hard to find the positive. But one way or another, we'll get through it. And of course, we're talking about our country, a country that had a horrible civil war, and yet we came back together. And we've been through tough things. We will get through this by a method not yet revealed to us, but we have to have faith in our history that tells us that what unites us will help us overcome these things that divide us, as miserably awful as they may be in the short term.
Thank you. I want to ask each of you, in your orbits, if you've come into contact with colleagues or family members or perhaps neighbors who may have differing political opinions from your own, or who may share your opinions but are having difficulty, accepting results, or difficulty with the emotional milieu around the election. What are some words or suggestions that you might make to folks, whether to diffuse a situation or to offer solace, or something I'm not even asking? I mean, what are some ways you may frame the conversation? And I guess, Dr. Lloyd-Jones, why don't we start with you? Oh, you're on mute.
You got me again. You got me again. That's a very useful question because I've certainly come into contact with people who have opposing views in relationship to my own view, and I have learned that human relation skills are so very important. Using our interpersonal capacity to show understanding and compassion really come in handy during this time of, again, as Dr. Adams referred to, this intersectionality of the medical COVID-19 and the racial and civil unrest along with the election year. And so I like to use, when I'm speaking with people and you can sense tension, I like to, and they ask a question that you really aren't prepared to answer, or you are uncomfortable answering truthfully, I like to use the phrase, "let me think about it." And what that does, it buys me time. It gets me off the hook, and it gives the other person an opportunity to say, okay. Another phrase I like to use is, "you may be right." You may be right. Because in an argumentative state, the person who's speaking wants to push forward their idea. And in order to break away, to say you may be right, I am acknowledging that they may have a point. I'm not necessarily agreeing, but I'm giving them this notion that I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about what you are saying. And then one of the last and probably my favorite phrase is, "I understand." And I understand, sometimes I juxtapose it with "I hear you," but I understand because I do have a sense of empathy. I do have a sense of compassion, and I understand that you believe what you believe. I'm not saying I agree. That's the difference. But I can put on your lenses temporarily and look through them and try to see what you see. And I'm willing to do that as a professional and a practitioner in many cases. But you may want to say, I hear you, as opposed to I understand, if you are uncomfortable stating that you understand them. So I think it's very important to have phrases in your back pocket that you can pull out and use to decrease the tension, the stress, and the anxiety in the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Those are excellent examples. Professor Adamson, how about you?
Yes, I think you did an amazing job there, Dr. Lloyd-Jones. Some of the things that I jotted down were very similar in nature. I just try to approach those situations genuinely, and I practice my active listening skills, which means that I genuinely try to hear the other person in the hopes that they'll genuinely try to hear me, and that it can be a conversation of respect and kindness. I've used this example with students a few times when we're talking about just engagement in general. Of if I show up at the front door and I'm banging and I'm speaking harshly or just acting a little more aggressively or unkindly, I'm probably either not going to answer the door because I'm going to avoid or hide out from those conversations and interactions. Maybe those are my stress or trauma responses. Or I might come back answering the door, meeting whatever those conversation and engagement skills are, which means I might yell and be ugly. And so I just really try to be that civil example where I just listen. And again, I may not say that I understand, but I can definitely say that I'm hearing and I'm trying to gather where they're coming from. And so those are some of the skills and things that I apply in the conversations. I think what we're really talking to here also is psychological flexibility, where we're recognizing and adapting and being proactive instead of reactive, and acknowledging even when we're not right ourselves. Like, I'll own that I may not know, I may not have an answer to that, I may not have an opinion, or maybe in a previous conversation I was wrong, and coming back and really demonstrating there that I'm human and open to the dialogue and to the concepts and what people are trying to communicate to me.
Okay, thank you. I should have said at the outset, if any members of our audience have questions for our panelists, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box here on the Zoom. Professor Randle, what about you? Do you have either stock phrases or responses that show that may diffuse a situation or help frame a conversation?
No, I do not. And I appreciate the thoughts that the others have provided. Generally with folks that I think are likely to have a different opinion, I just don't bring up the subject. But again, what's difficult about where we are now is the intensity of the feeling. If we were having a discussion about should we raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour, for example, each side could bring forth the data and the philosophy behind their position. But in the current situation in the United States, what we're really debating about is the nature of the country and our views of how things function on a very basic level. And it reminds me of a visitor we had a number of years ago from Northern Ireland. And this was when the problems were still more intense than they are now in Northern Ireland. And so I knew that he represented one side because he was someone who was in government over there. And so I asked him, because I wanted to learn more about the origins of the problem. I asked him to tell me more about the controversy between the Protestants and the Catholics. And he didn't hesitate. He looked at me very sternly and said, there is no controversy between the Protestants and the Catholics. There is a battle between God and the devil. Then I realized, oh, I can see why this is an authority problem to resolve. But for many people in this country, these cultural divisions that we have really are akin to a battle between God and the devil. And that was a hard one to find a compromise that's going to bridge over the difficulties. And so we really have to find ways on using exceptional levels to try to build understanding and entice from the other side more about the feelings that go into the worldview that they're expressing.
Thank you. At this point, I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. And if I don't see any at the moment, so I'll keep going here, but feel free to, like I said, Q&A button or chat button. I'd like to ask our panelists one thing that I didn't address before, but specifically around your students this semester, students or last semester, but if you're teaching classes, what's it been like for you're all essentially teaching graduate students at this point. So what's it been like with your graduate students? What's the level of engagement in political discourse? Have your students been talking about it when you kind of, now I know we're doing everything on Zoom, so it's like you're not like walking into a classroom where you're hearing the hubbub or the hullabaloo. But to the extent that you can comment on it, has this election season burrowed into your class time? Has it been a subject of peripheral discussion or central discussion? And what's the level? Do you find that the students we have here are particularly engaged, or certain classes may be particularly disengaged? I guess what are your observations of your students over this semester and maybe last semester? And Professor Adamson, we can start with you on this one.
Well, so in the social work department, I primarily coordinate and teach in the field courses. And so some of the things that we've talked about are how to implement activities within their practicum setting. And students have been really engaged with voter registration drives and communicating to clients of agencies how to navigate through registering to vote. And really educating around some of the misconceptions that are there. Now, as far as student discussions, we've had a couple of program-wide, we've called them fireside chats, we've called them check-ins, we've called them a variety of different things where students can come in and just talk about things that are concerning and stressing, and then also we like to have time to just celebrate successes too. So that's what I've been doing in my program. Again, I'm not teaching as much in the classroom this semester as maybe some of our other panelists.
But I mean, when you hearken to the title of our panel, both this one and the last one on civil discourse or civil engagement, I can't think of anything better than like actually registering people to vote. Because again, that seems agnostic or nonpartisan. I mean, you're just getting people to sort of exercise the franchise. I mean, that's really, get them engaged. I mean, that's, I think, in education of any stripe, but higher education here particularly, that is what we aspire to, is engaged citizenry. Professor Randle, what have you, students may seek you out because they know you're a sort of a political maven. Well, so you probably get some discussion.
They actually don't necessarily know that, and I don't bring that up, particularly one thing that happens to us with Zoom is that live class time has to be reduced a little bit. There are just so many hours that people can sit in on a Zoom meeting. So we really need, when we're together live, to focus on the material that we want to cover in the class. But I teach in human relations, as does Dr. Lloyd-Jones, and of course this is true in social work too. Our students are really focused on issues that affect people on a human level. So there's lots of interest in the issues. And so when we talk about issues and solutions and how people can approach influencing the process, it's really good for us to talk a little bit about how does the public policy making process work. Elections are a part of it. That's one thing that's very visible. We can go to the polls, we can vote to select our leaders, but in fact, we've got lots of other options too, where individually and through groups to which we belong, we can influence public policy making. And so I spend a lot of time in class talking about all the ways in which we can empower ourselves to have an influence on the outcome of public policy making.
Okay. And Dr. Lloyd-Jones, what have you experienced vis-a-vis your students?
So similar to Professor Randle, we focus quite a bit, our graduate students, on social problems and issues. And in my class, that has centered on discussions around voter suppression, in addition to climate change, which I think ignited the desire to vote even more among students when they talk about these issues. I recently had an article published, and it's coming out in January 2021, and I looked at the quick pivot of faculty members along with students from in-person instruction to virtual classrooms. And I came up with 3 competencies: collaboration, coaching, and care, that I had to master in order to assist with this shift. And so along with this notion of collaboration, caring, and coaching, part of our discussion centered on voting and what voting really means, and does it count, and can we make a difference? And those are subject areas and topics that I think are ongoing past this election to help us continue to think about what are the issues that matter to us. Our students, many of them have children, what matters to their children, and how does our style of governance assist us in bringing about a desired outcome and end.
Thank you. We have an audience question here. As we move into the new year, 2021, many of us will be experiencing a vast array of emotions. And we talked a little bit about campus and community resources for mental health support, but what are perhaps some self-help techniques or tips that we can use to help manage either strong emotions or conflicting emotions in general? Professor Adamson, let's start that one with you.
Well, so I think that we've talked a little bit about some self-care strategies, getting plenty of sleep, 6 to 8 hours per night, hydrating with water, good nutrition, exercise. Those are all basic things that we can do. And then we take it a step further and we really focus on what are those things that do recharge you and give you a renewed sense of energy and happiness. And so for some of us, that's yoga. And for some of us, that's getting out into nature and spending some time away from our television screens and limiting our media consumption. Those are just some basic strategies, things that we can incorporate. Going for a walk, feeling the breeze on our face, reading that book that we've been putting off that we're really looking forward to reading. I like the example that Brenda gave of the spa day and really just getting some relaxation. So it could be any of those things, but I think it does differ from person to person as far as when we get into, some of us really like nature, some of us hate the bugs. So, you know, what for you individually gives you that, that rejuvenation?
I like nature and I hate the bugs. Dr. Lloyd-Jones, anything to add there on self-care?
Yeah, I think Dr. Adamson certainly covered. I would add meditation and prayer. There's research that supports the notion of spirituality in giving us guidance and direction and purpose. And so we can add that should we choose to. I agree it's individualized, and consequently our strategies will differ based on our preferences and our openness to explore new areas that we might find useful.
Okay, thank you. We're getting near the top of the hour, so let's do a wrap up. And I'd like to ask each of you for a closing thought on this idea of civil discourse, civil political engagement, and maybe an action step, if there's a take home that you want to offer our audience. And I guess, Professor Randle, let's start with you.
I think the key thing is to encourage other people, as well as encouraging ourselves, to be open to understanding what motivates the feelings of those with different viewpoints. You know, given how deeply we are divided on a basic worldview kind of level right now, it's important to do that. And it's important to recognize that while I may not at all agree with those that I would consider the other side, there are in fact experiences, there are reasons, there are understandings that have motivated them to come to the viewpoint that they've got. Same's true with the viewpoint that I advocate. So if I've got needs that I see for myself in the country, those who are on the other side have needs that they see for themselves in the country. If we can understand those, maybe we can deal in a way that allows my needs to get met and the needs of those on the other side to get met as well. You know, the old saying is that feelings are facts. And so, which means that maybe you shouldn't feel that way. But if you feel that way, that's a fact, and we have to deal with that fact. And so those who are on the other side, they're expressing real feelings. We need to understand why they have those feelings. We need to look to see how we as a society can speak to that. And we want to encourage them to understand the real feelings that we have as well.
Well put. Well put. I mean, and right, accepting that feelings are real, and even when they're different than yours, but also giving yourself permission to feel, even when something doesn't go your way. Professor Adamson, let's go to you.
Well, I think that it's really important that we recognize, what we have control over and the things that we don't. And the two things that I have control over are when and how I engage, right? And so I think setting those boundaries are really important for the when and for the how. And as long as we're comfortable with those things and the consequences of those two things, then those are the things, again, that we have personal impact on and over. And I appreciate you. I very early on, someone used the word doctor, and I didn't adjust that or correct it. I'm just Tiffany with a master's degree, but I really do appreciate being included with such established and incredible panelists. So thank you.
We're very glad that you were here. You were a very welcome addition to this panel. And Dr. Lloyd-Jones, I want to give you the last word, your takeaway or action message.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yes, I echo President Schumann's compliment to you, Tiffany. So I think communication is powerful. And if we can have civil, respectful, human interaction, it puts us miles beyond those who are resistant to entertaining other ideas. You know, with the family, the parents and the daughter, I left them with a quote that they text me to tell me that they are still thinking about it, and I want to leave it with our audience today. And it's around words. Words can help. Words can hurt. So we must be mindful of our words because if the words we use are hurtful, they may be forgiven, but not necessarily forgotten. And so we want to be careful. Take a step back, lower our tone, speak calmly. We can speak confidently and certainly directly should the situation call for it. But we want to master ourselves, and as Tiffany spoke to, be careful of our reaction. Are we reacting or are we responding? Those two are different, and we want to be mindful of it. So yes, communication important. We can determine what it is that we want to happen in terms of our preference, where we want to engage, where we choose not to, but we also want to make sure that we are respectful in our tone and with our language.
Thank you. I want to thank each of our panelists, Brenda Lloyd-Jones, Tiffany Adamson, Rodger Randle. I want to thank Dr. Jasmine Willis-Wallace for helping organize today's panel, and also our media and communications team, including Bonnie Rucker and Tracy Kennedy, who are here today. We're getting some comments about thanking you for thanking us for holding the panel, I guess. And then there is also in the chat, you'll see a survey, a Qualtrics survey to answer your thoughts and share your feedback on this program. Coming up, we have tomorrow the first of our fall semester, the first one of this academic year, our presidential research series. We're going to be hearing from two social work faculty, Dr. Lisa Byers and Dallas Pettigrew, who are going to update us on tribal social work. And they are both tribal nation members. And we actually have a number of different programs specifically focused on different tribes. And there are scholarship programs and leadership development programs that bring tribal students here to get their master's degrees. And in fact, many complete their bachelor's degrees, I should say, at OU-Tulsa, which is relatively new for us. So come and complete their bachelor's degrees and go on to their master's degrees and then engage in their tribal community. So you can hear all about that tomorrow, same time slot, 12 to 1. You should have received email about that, or if you have questions, you can sign up or reach out to Bonnie Rucker. And then one other teaser, you will be getting more information on December 3rd. There will be a seminar on unlearning, that's unlearning sexism, which will take place on the morning of December 3rd, and more information on that will be to follow. But I want to thank our panelists and most of all, thank our audience for listening in today, and breathe a collective sigh of relief that this election is mostly behind us, and hope we can move forward in 2021 with both a widely distributed vaccine and a re-engagement in social cohesion and collaboration in more ways than one. So thank you all very much for participating.
Thanks for having us.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Schuman.